Chunming Paper, the biggest paper manufacturer in all of China, just went bankrupt. The numbers are staggering. Over $1.5 billion in losses, 600 billion yuan in debt, and 3/4 of its factories shut down. But this isn't just a corporate failure. This is a fault line cracking through the entire Chinese economy. Why? Because paper isn't just paper. It's the final layer in every transaction. It wraps the goods, seals the exports, completes the order. When paper stops, exports stop. When exports stop, cash flow dies. This collapse means factories aren't shipping, consumers aren't buying, and cities aren't breathing. And in a country where exports fuel jobs, jobs fuel spending, and spending props up everything, when one box goes unsold, an entire system starts to suffocate. So the real question is, how does a single sheet of paper take down a nation designed to sell everything? In 2024, China's largest paper manufacturer, Chunming Paper, lost the equivalent of $10.3 billion US. 3 months into 2025, it was already down another $2 billion. At first glance, that might sound like just a failed company. But what you're looking at is something far deeper. The collapse of a production empire. The slow-motion death of China's middle class. Chunming wasn't some small-town mill. It was a manufacturing titan listed on China's A shares, B shares, and even the Hong Kong exchange. It produced everything from high-grade whiteboard packaging to office paper and textbooks. At its peak, it supported tens of thousands of workers directly, and over 10 million indirectly, from truck drivers and dock workers to factory cafeteria cooks. But then it fell, and fast. By early 2025, over 70% of its production capacity had been shut down. Warehouses overflowed with unsold inventory. Machines sat frozen. Rats replaced workers. Its financials were a bloodbath. Revenue had collapsed by 88% year-over-year, its accounts were frozen, and lawsuits stacked up like old cardboard in the rain. But the numbers aren't what makes this a story worth telling. It's what they don't tell you, because Chunming was only the first domino. Across China, the entire paper sector is being wiped out. In 2024 alone, 24 out of 34 publicly listed paper companies reported catastrophic losses. And that's not a typo. That's over 70% of the major players drowning in red ink. Meanwhile, in just the first quarter of 2024, more than 50,000 paper-related companies were deregistered. That's more than 500 a day, disappearing from China's economy like ink in water. Prices tanked. Whiteboard paper, once essential for shipping boxes, retail packaging, and fast food containers, collapsed by 600 yuan per ton. 7 million tons of production capacity were permanently taken offline. This isn't a business downturn. It's an autopsy. And when you zoom out, you realize something bigger. This industry wasn't just about making paper. It was about making China's economic engine run. Think about it. Every online order needs a shipping box. Every takeout meal needs a container. Every book, every ad flyer, every store receipt. It all starts with paper. When people stop buying paper, it's because they've stopped buying everything else. And that's exactly what's happening. In 2024, China's express delivery sector, one of the biggest consumers of packaging, saw growth drop to just 3.8%. That's the lowest in 10 years. Restaurants, sales barely rose 2%. Real estate, down 8.5% in floor space sold. Retail spending, up just 2.5%. Again, the worst in over a decade. Even household incomes grew slower than GDP, which means the average Chinese family is falling behind. So what do people do when their wallets shrink? They cut back. On everything, even on paper. A former Chunming worker said it best. People aren't even buying toilet paper. They're folding napkins in half. Who's going to pay for a fancy white box? This isn't just about one company's collapse. It's about the invisible collapse of demand, the soft implosion of the world's second-largest economy. But why now? Because Chunming and companies like it were walking a tightrope. They were squeezed from both ends. Raw material costs surged. Electricity prices in 2024 jumped by 20%. Wood pulp, the base ingredient in most paper, climbed by nearly 10%. Imported scrap paper was blocked by China's own ban, creating shortages. Then came the environmental crackdowns. Dozens of provincial factories were forced to suspend or reduce output. In places like Shandong and Guangdong, paper plants went silent under the weight of carbon regulations and surprise inspections. Even when Kunming tried to resume, it found itself crippled. Too expensive to operate, too deep in debt to pivot. And what about the banks? By the end of 2024, Kunming had racked up over 600 billion yuan in debt. 18 billion was already overdue. Creditors froze its accounts. Suppliers stopped answering calls. Workers went unpaid. Entire towns that relied on the factory's wages went into hibernation. This isn't just economic mismanagement, it's structural rot. Because when a company can lose $1 billion and nobody notices, when 10,000 jobs vanish and there's no news coverage, when a national industry implodes and the government says, it's just a market correction, that's when you know it's not just a company dying. It's a system breaking down. And the silence isn't a glitch. It's a policy. If you read the Chinese headlines, you'd think Kunming Paper was just adjusting its portfolio. Temporary liquidity issues. A mild restructuring. The kind of harmless phrases that sound like a corporate rain delay. But when you go to the towns where those factories stood, where thousands used to clock in, you realize this isn't a correction. It's a collapse. Take Shouguang, a city in Shandong province. 10 years ago, it was booming. Known as Paper City, it hosted entire zones of suppliers, truckers, repair crews, restaurants, and dormitories all orbiting around one gravitational force, Kunming. Today, it's hollowed out. You see it in the hardware stores that no longer restock. In the street food vendors who've given up because no one buys breakfast anymore. In the school classrooms with more empty seats than full ones. But here's what you don't see. You don't see it on state television. You don't hear it in business briefings. And you definitely won't find it trending on Chinese social media, because most of it is deleted. Weibo, China's Twitter equivalent, saw over 40 million posts removed in the first quarter of 2025. Thousands of accounts were banned or suspended, especially those sharing factory closure photos or worker protests. Entire threads about Kunming's bankruptcy were wiped within hours. Why? Because the government has a problem bigger than economics. It has a narrative problem. And the narrative is this: everything is under control. Demand is soft but stable. Our transition to a consumption-led economy is on track. That's the message they want. But the reality? Kunming's collapse exposes the opposite. Because paper is a real-world indicator. You can't fake demand for it. No one buys an extra box just to inflate GDP. Paper moves when goods move, sells when life moves. And in towns built on that movement, the silence is deafening. What makes this worse is how invisible the pain has become. Unlike steel or coal, paper jobs don't involve massive industrial complexes. They're spread across small plants, mid-sized factories, regional printers. So when they die, they don't die with explosions. They die in silence, shift by shift, paycheck by paycheck. Workers aren't protesting en masse. They're quietly leaving. Some go home to rural provinces. Others take low-wage gigs, food delivery, live stream marketing, warehouse sorting. Jobs with no stability, no pension, and no future. And this isn't just bad luck. It's intentional policy. By using phrases like rebalancing and overcapacity reduction, Beijing disguises the fact that it's sacrificing an entire class of laborers to maintain the illusion of high-level economic control. But the illusion is cracking, because one by one, the stories are slipping out. The factory worker who hasn't been paid in 4 months. The truck driver whose company vanished overnight. The single mother who had to move back in with her parents after the factory dormitory shut down. The migrant couple who now live-stream paper folding tutorials just to make tips online. These stories don't make headlines, but they're everywhere. So the next time someone tells you, it's just one company, or it's only paper, ask them this: if it's just paper, why is the silence so loud? Here's the part nobody wants to admit. Not in Beijing, not on CNBC, and certainly not in the factories that now stand silent. Qinming's collapse wasn't an accident. It was a trade-off. And the people who paid the price? They weren't at the negotiating table. They were at the assembly line. Let's zoom out. Over the last 5 years, China has been facing a slow, grinding truth. Its old model, the one built on mass production, cheap labor, and endless exports, is dying. It worked for decades. From the 1990s to the 2010s, that model turned rice farmers into machine operators, fishing villages into megacities, and shipping docks into GDP engines. But now, labor costs have gone up. Global buyers are diversifying. And the United States, once China's biggest customer, is tightening the screws with tariffs, tracking rules, and trade restrictions. The writing was on the wall. So Beijing made a decision. Shift the economy away from heavy manufacturing. Move toward high-quality growth. Focus on domestic consumption, AI, green tech, and self-reliance. Sounds smart, right? Except there was a catch. You can't build a new economy overnight. And you can't bring everyone along. So instead of announcing a painful transition, they let the old system quietly starve. Industries like paper, textiles, low-end plastics, basic metals, all of them were once core to China's rise. But in the new strategy, they're expendable. That's why Qinming was left to die. No bailout, no press conference, no national rescue plan, because saving it would have sent the wrong message. It would have implied that the old model still matters. But here's the twist. The new model is not ready. China's consumer economy is fragile. The tech sector is under pressure from US sanctions. And green manufacturing, it needs massive investment and time. So for now, the country is caught in between. Not industrial enough to power the old machine, not innovative enough to lead the new one. And in that gap, millions of workers are being left behind. This is where strategy meets sacrifice. Beijing isn't clueless. They know what they're doing, but what they're doing is cold. They've decided to protect long-term stability, even if it means short-term suffering for entire sectors of society. And to make it work, they control the narrative. Words like overcapacity replace mass layoffs. Rebalancing sounds better than abandoning industries. Structural optimization hides the human cost. But the cost is real. You can see it in the suicide notes left by unpaid workers, in the empty schools in factory towns, in the children sent back to villages because their parents can no longer afford to rent near the cities. This isn't just economic evolution. It's controlled demolition. And it's not happening because China is weak. It's happening because the leadership believes this is the only way to keep the ship afloat, even if it means throwing entire generations overboard. So no, the collapse of Qinming wasn't a surprise. It was part of the map. And when a superpower decides that 10 million dreams are an acceptable loss, you start to understand what kind of game is really being played. When a company like Qinming Paper goes down, it doesn't fall alone. It pulls thousands, sometimes millions, down with it. The first domino is the company itself. It misses a payroll. Then it misses another. Then vendors stop delivering. Then the power company cuts the electricity. Then the lights go out for good. But by then, the real damage has already begun. Take the workers. Most didn't even get a warning. One day, their factory line manager said, "No shifts this week." The next week, the gate was locked. The week after that, the dormitory cafeteria shut down. Some were owed 2 months' wages. Others hadn't had social security contributions in over a year. But they didn't protest, they packed up and left. The lucky ones found temporary work, delivering food, driving electric mopeds, sorting boxes for online warehouses. But those jobs pay half, sometimes a third, of what they earned before. And they come with no contracts, no insurance, no dignity. The unlucky ones? They went back to the countryside, or stayed in the city, sleeping in shared rooms, applying for jobs that no one is hiring for. A 39-year-old printing technician in Zhangjiang said this, "I've done one job my whole life, press operator. Now, every job wants young people who can live stream or sell. What do I sell? I don't even know how to use TikTok." And he's not alone. In cities like Shouguang, Dongguan, Suzhou, once booming industrial hubs, the change is visible. Street vendors now outnumber buyers. Barbershops and corner stores sit empty all day. Rental signs cover entire apartment blocks once filled with factory families. Local restaurants have collapsed. Daycare centers are shutting down. Even public buses run half-empty because there's nowhere left to go. Behind every shuttered paper mill is an invisible map of destruction. Landlords who lost tenants. Delivery services with no boxes to move. Children pulled out of school because mom and dad couldn't pay tuition. These aren't adjustments. They're amputations. And the cruelest part? None of it made the news. No national mourning. No headline grief. No televised apology from corporate CEOs or city officials. Just silence. Because once a sector is deemed non-strategic, its workers become non-people. Their pain becomes background noise. So when you hear economists say, "This is just a cycle," or "creative destruction is healthy," remember this: for the families who lived on those wages, who planned weddings, raised children, paid off loans, this wasn't creative. It was just destruction. The collapse of Qinming paper wasn't just a business failure. It was a social rupture, the kind that leaves a scar across generations. When factories die, the economy doesn't just lose production. It loses purpose. Entire communities, built around steady shifts and modest paychecks, begin to rot from the inside. The first signs are subtle. Weddings get postponed. Children are pulled out of preschool. A couple cancels plans to move into a new apartment. A grandmother stops buying meat at the market. Then it accelerates. Birth rates in these industrial cities, already low, drop even further. Young couples don't marry, or they split up, worn down by joblessness and stress. One woman in her early 30s, once a quality inspector at a Qinming plant, said this: "We stopped talking about the future. First it was money, then it was the mood, then it was silence." Her boyfriend left. She moved back in with her parents, in a two-room house with no heating. Multiply that by hundreds of thousands and you get a demographic collapse, not from war or famine but from quiet despair. Meanwhile, the government says very little. Can't admit the scale of the damage because that would raise a bigger question. If the middle class is this fragile, what was all the growth really for? And the truth is brutal. The Chinese miracle worked only as long as demand, debt, and silence could grow together. But now demand is shrinking, debt is cracking, and the silence is breaking too. In 2024 alone, protests related to unpaid wages and factory closures increased by over 40%. Videos of clashes between workers and security guards in Guangdong, Hubei, and Sichuan briefly surfaced, before being scrubbed from the internet. Weibo accounts posting such clips were shut down within hours. And yet, the unrest continues, not in loud demonstrations, but in migration, in divorce rates, in suicide rates that no one reports, in the slow withdrawal of trust from government, from employers, from the future. Because people aren't just losing jobs, they're losing structure. When factories close, schools close. When schools close, families disperse. When families disperse, entire neighborhoods hollow out. What's left? A nation with growth targets but no growth. With factories but no orders. With slogans but no buyers. This isn't a downturn. It's a long surrender. And Qinming paper? It wasn't the first. It won't be the last. Because when an economy sacrifices its people to protect its numbers, eventually the numbers stop meaning anything at all. No bombs fell. No tanks rolled in. No headlines screamed crisis. But 10 million dreams still died. Not in one day, but over months of silence. In towns where no one was hiring. In factories where no one was listening. In homes where no one dared to hope. And the worst part? It didn't make the news. Because when collapse comes quietly, with locked gates instead of gunfire, with layoffs instead of flames, it's easy to pretend everything's fine. But ask yourself this: if a nation no longer protects the people who built its rise, if it lets them vanish one by one in silence, Is that still a rising power? Or is it something else entirely? A machine running on memory, printing prosperity on paper that no longer sells?